I'm in conversation with an author named Troy Parfitt. So Troy has a new book, and I'll be honest with you, Troy, I couldn't get the date of publication for this book. Is this book only a few months old, or is it a few years old? You seem to have a brand new book, but I don't know quite when it came out, dealing with the intellectual oddities of Jordan Peterson, we'll say, to be put. When did the book come out, Troy?
The book came out on December 21st, 2020. But if you buy the book, I dated it ahead a few days. So it says publication copyright 2021, which is a kind of trade practice.
So that's interesting. And the book is referred to as Volume 1. So I presume, having seen your YouTube channel, I take it you have a Volume 2 that's going to deal with Jordan Peterson's more recent work, an assessment of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume you're now going to go after Peterson's Beyond Order, yes?
Yeah, that's something like that. But the framework and most of the content for Volume 2 was already written before Beyond Order came out. So I'll probably just be dealing with Beyond Order in one section called Beyond Order.
Okay.
And,
so I'm surprised just because on your YouTube channel, it did seem to me that you had done an in-depth reading of Beyond Order within days of that book being published. Yes, you had quick turnaround on applying your analysis of Peterson's work to his new book when it came out just a few months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and incredibly, I knew that I'd find plagiarism in the book, and I knew who from, and sure enough, what a shock. So the pattern continues.
Right.
In fact, it's recycled plagiarism in many instances. So
Well, let's introduce the audience to this one step at a time. I'm going to start the shower under the pool. Now, I just say to describe myself as a Jordan Peterson skeptic would be an understatement, but that skepticism can lead off in several different possible directions. One view of Dr. Peterson would be that he is a totally normal, somewhat stupid young Canadian man who grew up reading books such as Aleister Crowley, and especially the Necronomicon, written by Simon. Books that were hit books, popular books, in the decade of the 1980s and the late 1970s. That he was a young man who got interested in the philosophy of Carl Jung and what could be frankly called pulp fiction occultism, yes? Because a book like the Necronomicon, that was a mainstream mass market trade paperback. Now, so to say this, you have gone through the corpus, the small corpus of Dr. Peterson's published work, and the much larger corpus of his YouTube videos. You had a level of self-discipline I have never had to go through hours and hours of this guy's aimless videos, and I think you've picked out quite correctly, this series of influences. What can you tell me? I mean, okay, well, how do I put this in a more autobiographical frame? Did you ever read the Necronomicon, or did you have to read this kind of material because of Dr. Peterson? Were you encountering this stuff for the first time because of Dr. Peterson?
It's funny that you should ask. When I was 14, I went through, when you're a kid, you try on different phases, and I went through this phase for, I think it was about half a year, where I was listening to heavy metal music. I wore a kind of funny cap, like one of the guys at AC/DC, and I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I bought the Necronomicon at Cole's bookstore and hid it from my parents, so they wouldn't see it. I was
14. So this
this
is a classic example of Dungeons and Dragons leading to Satanism. So this is what your church pastor warned you about. Go on, Craig.
Yes, and interestingly, I had just recently stopped going to church, and anyway, but I read like a couple of chapters. I didn't get it. I didn't like it. I changed. I stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons. I hid the book or threw it away. Whatever was under the next phase. I think it was the Beatles next, and I was like I was wearing tie dyes and things like this. So it didn't stick.
When you started reading Jordan Peterson, because I mean, it is very hard just to read that one chapter about lobsters. Were you getting the feeling, when you first started reading this, that some of his use of mythology, that this really was bringing back to you the memory of the Necronomicon and Aleister Crowley? And
came later.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
for me, that might be a first impression of him. There's the use he makes of history and mythology and symbolism. But go on, yeah.
No, I was walking around this neighborhood, listening to all these with a notebook, listening to him going on evening walks and listening to his lectures, and then I finally realized, like, hold on, Marduk and Osiris,
right.
and the great goddess of the chaos. Where have I heard that before? And then I downloaded that Necronomicon again, and I found all that Tiamat and stuff. It was like, Peterson says this about Tiamat.
It cracks me up because you can also tell he's someone who has done absolutely zero research on Marduk and Tiamat in Middle Eastern ancient religions.
And when I realized that was around the time that he had just interviewed with Kathy Newman from Channel 4 News,
right?
And all of his fans were saying, yeah, he really stuck it to that woman, He told her what was what. And I realized that people like Kathy Newman they're really suspicious, like something's wrong with this guy, but they can't quite figure out what. And here I am sitting with a copy of the Necronomicon and looking at Peterson's maps of meaning, thinking that's plagiarized almost verbatim.
Right.
That's plagiarized almost verbatim. Good God, I'm dealing with an adult child.
Well, okay. So let me push back on that just a little bit, though. So when you say plagiarized, I don't think you use the word in the same way other people would.
No.
I mean, I mean, when I look at, so his book contains numerous parallelisms and comparisons, sometimes with precise wording being verbatim the same. And it does establish what has intellectually influenced Peterson. There's no doubt about that. But, this sounds like a very immature, slightly insane, doddering, elderly drug addict incoherently regurgitating things that he read in the Necronomicon and in Aleister Crowley. But, I mean, I think for many people, they'd say, oh, well, this isn't really plagiarism.
It's
go on.
Plagiarism.
Okay, go on.
It's wholesale academic fraud. So my background, I have a background in linguistics. So that I think that specifically social linguistics, I think that helped lend to being able to figure out that this is more than influence. This is more than social construction. Like when I write, before I wrote about Peterson, I wrote other books. Other people's styles influenced me, but I mentioned them. Like the way they kind of turn a sentence or turn a phrase or something. But I would say, here are the people that I like. Hint, hint. Like I've kind of borrowed from their register or something like that. But it's not. But I'm not sitting down with their book open beside me and copying out the sentence and then just changing a couple of words.
Right.
That and that's what Peterson is doing. It's bananas, and he talks about how much he dislikes writing.
Right.
And how he just hates it. Well, I think that in addition to all of his other problems like plagiarizing from the occult, he can't write. And you never hear anyone say, not even his fans, he's
right.
a writer.
Okay.
So well written.
So again, I'm just going to challenge you though. I'm going to use the chapter about lobsters as an example. There's certainly many of Jordan Peterson's fans, or even most of them, will admit that the chapter on lobsters is badly written. So that's one view of it, is that it's badly written. And one explanation for why it's badly written would be that he's an idiot or he's insane. There are many explanations for bad writing. This doesn't just lend itself to one possible analysis. No, wait. Another analysis of the lobster chapter is that it is full of very carefully constructed hidden meanings. Now, I would think so. Maybe I don't know where you are on the spectrum. Maybe you're in the middle. Maybe because just given what you said, maybe you think it's a mix of bad writing and carefully constructed, imagery, which, frankly, to some extent, it has an occult purpose in the same way that Aleister Crowley's writing has an occult purpose, or the Necronomicon, this kind of pulp paperback Satanism, frankly. Anyway, so where do you stand on the spectrum?
Well, I would agree that it has to do with numerous factors. He lacks talent to write. He's, of course, guided by... he's mentally insane. So I think that there are many lenses through which we can view Peterson. Right. But first and foremost, we ought to see him as a lunatic, I think. And there's that. And also,
okay, I agree with you there. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, it's occultic. And he's... the idea of the lobster almost certainly comes from the occult. The crab is... Aleister Crowley wrote about lobsters and crabs and the rising of the lobster and whatever else. And Peterson has sort of imitated his language on lobsters. You wouldn't see that in Volume 1. That'll be in Volume 2. So I've documented well over 500 examples of him plagiarizing Aleister Crowley. So in his new book, Beyond Order,
Yeah.
he doesn't plagiarize Adolf Hitler so much. That's my main claim, that he's plagiarizing Hitler.
Right.
He's reverted to mostly to plagiarizing from Aleister Crowley. And I would say second is that book you mentioned, the Necronomicon. And then it's Hitler, but it's much more covert than usual. The Hitler plagiarism is quite apparent in 12 Rules for Life, and also Maps of Meaning. And Maps of Meaning is filled with plagiarism as well. And I would say mostly from Aleister Crowley. But in order it goes.
So again, I'm just going to challenge you. So I've already admitted that I share the analytical view that he's fundamentally an insane person. And I just say, though, it is then very difficult to pin down any analysis of someone's incoherencies or intentions once we've admitted that we think that a lot of this is insane, that there is no, some of this is written with no clear purpose, with no clear plan, rather than interpreting it as sort of brilliantly and intentionally manipulating the audience. Go on, yeah?
No, so he has a plan. Like, he still, even though he's, I believe, so I argue in the book that he has schizophrenia. And I found,
yes, he's been diagnosed with it. I just want to note for the audience, so this is not slander. He himself has admitted, and his daughter admitted, that he has been diagnosed as schizophrenic. Go on, yeah.
Yes, and then she also denied it. So a doctor diagnosed him with it, and then, but I think
she claimed that she disagrees. That's different from denying it. So she admits it happened. She just doesn't like the diagnosis. That's different.
Yes.
If someone diagnoses me and says that I'm diabetic, but I disagree, that's different from denying that I was ever diagnosed as having diabetes. Okay, let's keep it straight. Both father and daughter have stated on the record that he has been diagnosed as schizophrenic by more than one medical professional. They got a second opinion and so on. They talked through that thing. And so this was just a digression. You were saying you do primarily see him as schizophrenic.
In Peterson, there are a million digressions, so that's I think that's the main lens through that we ought to view him as
right.
He's schizophrenic. Now, when I call him a lunatic, I just want to be clear that I'm not denigrating other people with schizophrenia or making him a mental illness. I just dislike him so intently that I'm making an exception.
So hashtag not all schizophrenics. not all schizophrenics are as bad as Jordan Peterson. This is true.
It's a horrible disease.
So look, I'm just going to say, I can normalize rather than abnormalize Peterson's experience, however. So as I've already alluded to, and many people in the audience may not be old enough to remember when this stuff was mainstream. I am. You and I are about the same age, Troy. Not to dox you, but you and I are about the same age. I can remember a time when books like the Necronomicon were mainstream on store shelves. I can remember when that whole school of 1970s Jungian reinterpretation of mythology was very mainstream. And it was powerfully linked to people experimenting with LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs, magic mushrooms, the kind of valorization of the ego death and the hallucinatory trip, we're feeling some production. All of those things were quite mainstream in white English-speaking Canada, which is where, Jordan Peterson comes. So just say, as much as we can kind of abnormalize him and treat him as an outlier or an extraordinary person, I think there are a lot of cranky old men from his generation who were influenced by many of the same sources, especially people with PhDs. Go on. Sure.
That analysis is exactly what people like Kathy Newman didn't understand.
Right.
She's looking at him squinting, something's wrong with you. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the Necronomicon going, he's plagiarized this book. He's like he took too many drugs and he read too many books by the occult. That's a very from the occult, from Aleister Crowley. That's a very good way.
Yes.
So your analysis is like light years ahead of medical experiments.
I have some advantages over the average journalist.
They keep referring, like for example in Beyond Order, they kept referring to what he wrote as mythology. I mean, he cites a book about the occult and talks about Hermeticism. The Aleister Crowley's religion was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, influenced by Hermeticism, which is a strain of the occult. I mean, it's right there in the text. He writes about the occult in Maps of Meaning. They never mention this. And if you tell anyone this, look, why is he writing about the occult in these so-called help books? And why does he say flattering things about the occult or explain what he learned about the occult? The response you'll get is, no, he doesn't.
You're right. Yeah.
And if you show them, they don't want to see it. it's right. It's on page 17. I could no, I don't want to see it. I just know that he isn't doing that.
Right.
So a lot of people. It's not. This is not.
Well, let me quote your book. This is from within the first 22 pages. To quote the book, quote, "Why did the doctor, i.e., why did Dr. Jordan Peterson, extol the reliability of magic mushrooms or label hallucinogens, quote unquote, amazing? Why did he insist that the sole way to quit smoking was having a mystical experience induced by these same magic mushrooms? Why did he publish a psychedelic video promoting magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, and ecstasy, also known as MDMA?" Now, again, especially given the predominantly conservative, predominantly Christian public he is preaching to, this is hidden in plain sight. Yeah. So just given that you've read so much of his work and you've also seen all of the videos, though, have you ever seen him admitting to using these drugs himself?
Yes.
Okay, you have,
yes. Yeah. There's an interview where he's talking to someone who sounds like he's stoned in the interview. They're talking about mushrooms or something like that, and then the guy asks him, that kind of like a stoner voice, "Have you ever taken these?" or something. And, Jordan Peterson, yes, I have.
Right.
And so I hope that he's admitting to doing this. And yes, it's and you mentioned conservatism and the Christianity. I mean, his interpretation of Christ is not
right
as per the Bible. And someone should have picked up on this. He talks
right.
about Christ like a Gnostic interpretation, like a mystical interpretation of Christ. I mean, I haven't even read the Bible in full, but even I know that that's not Christ from that's not Christ from the Bible.
Right. Well,
that's not from So.
I think too. I mean, he reflects a tradition that involves and includes Aleister Crowley, that involves and includes a pre-Nazi figure like Arthur Schopenhauer. That involves and includes Nietzsche, who is in some ways derivative of Schopenhauer, of a very dangerous ambivalence towards Christianity and Christ, where, there's this philosophy of the will, and then whether or not that should destroy Christianity, which, even if you read Hitler directly, sometimes that's what Hitler is saying, is that his movement is anti-Christian, or if it should in some sense embrace the inner essence of Christianity, but transcend or discard other elements. So I'd say he is a kind of consistent proponent of that view. I think he has a lot in common with Aleister Crowley, and frankly, a whole lot of mediocre minds who were inspired by Carl Jung. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so. Peterson is most of his ideas are not his own.
Yes, yeah.
Most of his ideas are copied from other people, and one of his big ideas is that one of the things that he likes about Crowley is that his ideas were very similar to he got them from Nietzsche, and they're very similar to that of Hitler. The post Judeo-Christian world, where you can unleash your inner demon, and we don't have to live by the stultifying laws that have been handed down to us through the Bible. And of course, this is all delusion anyway, because I don't think that we are so influenced by the morals in the Bible. Like, I've been reading the Old Testament recently, and I don't see how it's very moral. I don't see how it's very moral. And I rejected Christianity when I was quite young. I think.
And even in Israel, very few people actually live their lives according to the Old Testament. There are tiny minority sects within Judaism that actually live by the rite of the Old Testament, and they do things like sacrificing goats and sheep. They actually carry out those rituals, and they're regarded as insane or eccentric. To us now, that looks satanic. These blood rites of they sacrifice the animal and daub the blood on each other's foreheads and so on. That's in the Bible, But yeah. So that there's another question there: the gap between what we think of as Christian culture and actual Christianity in the Bible, which includes sex slavery and genocide and all kinds of other things that Christians presume they're against or presume their religion. Sorry, go on. I don't know if to what extent I interrupted you there.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So.
I was going to say, this side of Jordan Peterson, though, one of my few criticisms of your book, and maybe in volume 2 you'll do something different, or maybe you'll make a YouTube video to it, because I know YouTube, unlike a book, you can do in bits and pieces at any time. I don't like what you do with narcissism and Peterson. So for those in the audience who don't know, there's narcissism as a cultural concept, and then there's the specific diagnosis of NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Many of the same, shall we say, manic episodes or examples of madness or at least eccentricity in Jordan Peterson's writing and his conduct on YouTube and so on. Many of them can be interpreted as indicating his fragility rather than his egomania. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, rather than indicating narcissism or NPD, it can be a sense of dejected worthlessness that is out here. So I just want to suggest that to you very broadly and ask if you've ever had that sense that, that there is a more fragile Jordan Peterson that emerged with this in some ways. And that could be linked to Carl Jung and so on. Go on, yeah.
Well, there's certainly a very fragile Peterson behind the false persona
Right.
of the strong father figure. He is a child. And that's what a narcissist is. They're like it's like arrested development. And actually, what he's been doing, although I haven't told anyone this so far, and I didn't write about it in Volume 1, is that what he's actually doing is he's giving a running confessional on how he was traumatized as a child. If you listen carefully to what he's saying, he talks about his father, and then he'll talk about Adolf Hitler like he's confused the two, and he talks about schizophrenia and growing up under a domineering parent and so on. And I think that when he was young, I think he was mentally ill when he was young, and I think that his father was possibly also mentally ill, and that runs in the family, as he has said, and that he was mistreated. And then I think that everything he's trying to do is to try to prove his worth to his biological father in some really warped and twisted way. So
he has indeed stated that quite literally as part of his philosophy, that the meaning of your philosophy is to go and rescue your dead father from hell, is to go into the mouth of a whale and rescue this issue of redeeming one's relationship with one's father beyond the grave is both literally and symbolically part of the philosophy of Jordan Peterson. Go on. Just to include the audience if they haven't wasted their time on this stuff as much as I have. Yeah.
When he talks about redeeming his father, this is going to sound strange to your listeners if they haven't read the book or if they're not familiar with what I'm talking about, but he's speaking in code. What he means, you don't wake up every day and say, redeem the father. What do you mean by that? But this is one of the questions that no one ever asks. Who's the father? Why should we redeem him? Redeem him for what? Critical questions don't exist in the Peterson sphere, and journalists certainly aren't helping. And what he means is that you have to redeem the figure of the fatherland, Adolf Hitler. That's what he means by that. He calls Hitler God the Father, the jovial father of the race, the great father, the all-seeing great father. So when he says we need to redeem or rejuvenate the father, this is like we need to rejuvenate the Reich. And he talks about rejuvenation of the state. We need to rejuvenate the state. He's not political, mind you, but we need to rejuvenate the state. And Hitler talked about the need to rejuvenate the Reich and said, we National Socialists will rejuvenate the world. So this is crypto-fascism.
Right.
So a number of claims. There are a number of claims in this book that he's plagiarizing Hitler, he's plagiarizing Crowley, he's plagiarizing others like people you've mentioned, Nietzsche and Jung, and he's also a crypto-fascist, and he's almost certainly schizophrenic. And yes.
So. No. I'm happy to contribute as much as you want to the conversation. I was going to say on this issue of self-loathing, a lot of unsophisticated people interpret what he says about dominance and dominance hierarchies, and I think this will inevitably bring us back to questions about fascism and so on. They interpret this as him proclaiming his own strength and his own dominance. But when I look at that, whether it's what he says in lectures or in the actual chapter about lobsters and dominance hierarchies in Jordan Peterson's own book, what seems to me to be going on there is he's expressing his own self-loathing, his own lack of self-esteem, that he considers himself and his daughter to be people, and of course completely scientifically false. What I'm about to say has no scientific validity, and it couldn't possibly have scientific validity. But he felt that he and his daughter both were born with low serotonin levels. And he repeatedly and unscientifically expresses that somehow the dominance hierarchy is about who has the most serotonin, which crayfish or which lobster has the most serotonin in its brain. And actually what he's saying is that he feels that he and his daughter, and you make a very good point, possibly his own father also, perhaps this goes back another generation as well as going forward another generation, that they were born to be at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, that they are the losers, that they are the ones, as he says quite openly, teetering on the edge of of suicide. I mean, he talks about just waking up in the morning, and he attributes this to various mysterious ailments that don't exist. And his daughter also has this series of mysterious ailments that do not really exist. But his being miserable, fragile, breaking down, weeping in public for ridiculous reasons all the time, the hyper fragile Jordan Peterson, and how that fits into the idea of the dominance hierarchy. I just say this madness is susceptible to more than one analysis or interpretation.
Oh, for sure, everything is. I would say that I think when he does the waterworks, it's a show. I don't think that the crying is real. The self-loathing, I think, is probably a sign of possibly vulnerable narcissism, and he inflates his ego so much to try to be the super, kind of like a Superman or something like that. As for the dominance hierarchy, it is a metaphorical or aspirational zone, and you're supposed to. It has 10 levels, he has said, and his lobsters are supposed to ascend the 10 levels. And at the top of the dominance hierarchy, there's the all-seeing eye of Horus, which of course was the figurehead of Aleister Crowley's religion. Right. Nobody ever points this out as being strange. But when I say, hello, he's actually plagiarizing Aleister Crowley, people call me strange. Look, I'm not the one with a giant cult whose the central paradigm is an Egyptian pyramid over which there floats a magical eye. And I don't tell people you need to be like the eye. Be like the eye of Horus. Pay attention to problems that are around you. What is it that? That's absolute madness. I mean, if I had a professor who started talking about the all-seeing eye of Horus in that way in a class, I'd be straight out the door to the registrar's office and asking for my money back. Who is this lunatic in the classroom? What the hell is this? It's just that the whole story is just so strange.
Well, I'd also just digress here in case any of my listeners think that this material is interesting to read. Nothing could be more boring than the philosophy of Aleister Crowley. Like, it's incredibly boring and pointless. And I would say it's especially boring and pointless if you are a young man growing up in white English-speaking Canada, which is what Jordan Peterson was, trying to change your own life for the better, like trying to use it as something like a self-help book. Now, I could say to you also, I mean, just to keep it on Peterson rather than Crowley, this philosophy of being like the eye of Horus, how could you possibly apply this in your life? I mean, what do you mean? How can you say this is self-improvement? Well, yes, only now do I realize my mistake was I wasn't being enough like the eye of Horus,
I'm at the grocery store, but I forgot to bring my shopping bags. What would Horus do?
You read all the ingredients on every item you buy at the grocery store. Be like the eye of Horus. This is not there are slogans. Like, look, I'm not a fan of self-help literature. I'm really not. But you can look at self-help books written by people where they're giving you some kind of advice you could apply to your education or your finances or something. But yes, Jordan Peterson's advice, it has this kind of radical irrelevance to modern life that, again, I see in Crowley. And that whole tradition coming out of Crowley, by the way, he's born in the same year as Carl Jung. You can't really, they were more or less simultaneous famous figures. Yeah. So anyway,
I wondered if Jung knew about Crowley. I wondered if he
sure.
read it, but I don't know.
He would have known about him at least on the level of having read newspaper articles about him, because Crowley managed to make himself notorious. I mean, that's the only reason anyone knows his books today.
The British press, that's right.
Yeah. Do you see? So let me just ask you this before we get into kind of the Adolf Hitler side of it expressly. With this kind of material about the snake eating the snake, with the eye of Horus and so on, do you think that the final point of his philosophy is that man himself should become God? Which is a theory all the fascists played with, they rarely committed to, and Crowley and Nietzsche were interested in this,
The Ubermensch, yes. God is dead, Peterson's always reminding us. And we need to, and there's this idea that we should take that notion under ourselves. It's a hell of an idea, he says, that we need to become divine ourselves. I mean, it's just an idea. I'm not espousing that idea. I'm just saying there's this idea. He just floats these ideas, and that's what he means. Yeah. So that we need to become godlike.
So do you think he's really kind of rolling that out slowly as the point of his philosophy, or do you think he is just the world's most inarticulate advocate for it?
Because it's very covert.
Yes,
So,
that I would agree.
yes,
If that's the point, it's baffling rather than overt and direct. Yeah.
yeah, and also people don't ask questions like so. And then he has said, he endorses the Superman or says nice things about
Yes.
Superman.
Right.
And then in another video, he said that the Nazis appropriated the idea of the Superman, and it's a concept they really pulled off. This is praise. He's commending them for pulling off this idea of the Superman. And then later he talks about the idea of the Übermensch without the Nazi context, but you're supposed to put it together. Oh yes, over here he said that about the Superman in connection with the Nazis. Oh, and we could become godlike. We could become like an Übermensch.
Right.
But people don't make these elementary connections. I don't understand why not. And that may sound like simplistic thinking, like I'm just making a simple connection that's not there.
Well, no. So what the audience doesn't understand is, as simplistic as it may sound for Troy to make these comparisons, you have to understand the incredibly simplistic use of historical facts and mythology that are made by followers of Carl Jung. And Jordan Peterson may be an extraordinary example of that in some ways, but in many ways he is a dismally ordinary example. I just mentioned to you, because you may not know it. Go on.
You don't like
No, you know what? I never had the experience Jordan Peterson had of coming home drunk one night and sitting down with a pen and paper and drawing a picture of Jesus Christ wrapped in a giant snake and deciding that I was going to take on it. That kind of Jungian symbolism really never did it for me.
Yes, Jung and Crowley write about that too. That Christ was on the cross and the bird, I think it's horse, was pecking the eyes out of Christ's head or something like that. And again, it's to signify the end of the stultifying Jewish era. And
the epoch, yes.
The Aryan era of where we can all become devils and create the new Eon or Third Reich. And this is the core belief of what Peterson thinks. But again, journalists would never ever think of that. Who could have such beliefs? This is why journalists are, like you see, some pretty intelligent people like Stephen Sacker from the BBC and Wendy Mesley from the CBC. They're getting really close. They know he's a fascist. They know something is wrong, but what is it that he's hiding? And they don't know, and that's what it is. It all comes from those trashy the occultic paperbacks. And
yes.
He says in 12 Rules for Life he hung out with the bad kids. Now, you're Canadian, I'm Canadian. Think about what the bad kids would be like in Fairview, Alberta.
They played Dungeons and Dragons, and they read the Necronomicon, and they were into H.P. Lovecraft. He probably later got into Carl Jung, or more erudite thing, but probably started with Lovecraft and Necronomicon, this kind of thing. Yeah, come on. Maybe space aliens. Yeah.
Heaps of drugs.
Yes. Right, yeah.
And a bunch of borderline criminals who were his friends and so on. And his best friend, who he compared to Adolf Hitler, he said that his best friend, Chris, he calls him, his real name is Robert Durnan, or Richard Durnan. At Harvard, he talked about his friend. He didn't say his name, and he said he was just like Hitler, but he didn't have the opportunity to murder people. But if he'd had the chance, he would have, like Hitler did and so on. And so that's his best friend, someone who's like Adolf Hitler.
Right. Well, that's how Peterson sees his best friend. I doubt that you or I would we would both see this guy as a very mediocre, self-indulgent undergraduate student. I'm just saying, but this is how Peterson clothes him in greatness, because Peterson makes everyone into a hero or a villain this way. Yeah. I was just say, there's the question of establishing the particular source material Peterson is working from, which your book goes a long way towards, in my opinion. But there's also the kind of overall methodology of his bullshit. And, I'll just give you an example. This may interest you in its particulars, but my point is here more general with how these people think. And when I say these people, I mean a certain generation who grew up with psychedelic drugs and the philosophy of Carl Jung and a few other of these readily accessible sources. Aleister Crowley was personal friends with Ananda Mehta. So I am assuming you didn't. So I'm giving you an interesting wrinkle. Ananda Mehta was a white Englishman who at that time flew. I say flew. He probably took a boat. Now that I think about it. Anyway, one way or another, he transported himself to Southeast Asia and became one of the first white men to ever become a Theravada Buddhist monk. He ordained, and he became a very activist vocal leader who published books. So he didn't just become a monk and go and live in a cave. He presented a view that in the future, Europe should itself become Buddhist, should convert to Buddhism. But before that, he was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn and was close personal friends with, yeah. And he was perceived as the most talented or charismatic of the younger members. I think he was more favored than Crowley. And he went on to be a charismatic and successful Buddhist monk. Interesting footnote here about how reality works. Why did he go to Southeast Asia in the first place and then get tempted to leave behind occultism for Buddhism? It was his health. He had respiratory problems, and as many people understand, there were no cures for those problems. He went out to live in the tropics, and then once he was there, more than the climate influenced him. Okay, but this is my point. Here's what happened. The philosophy of thelema. So thelema and thelemaism is the quote unquote philosophy of Elster.
Is that how you pronounce it?
It's my preferred pronunciation. Yes, so thelema can also be found on the internet, but yes. But anyway, thelema rhymes with dilemma. Anyway, what he did was he directly took Buddhism as interpreted by his personal friend, because he didn't actually do any research. None of these people actually researched ancient Egypt. None of them even researched Greece or Rome. You know what I mean? This is this incredibly facile, it would be like someone looking at Google image search today while high on mushrooms and LSD. Like, that's the level of research these guys did. But, what Aleister Crowley did was he took the idea of Buddhist philosophy from this monk who spoke English, Ananda Metia, and he basically deleted all of the stuff about selflessness and replaced it with selfishness. That's the kind of reinterpretation he placed. Instead of having no soul and no self, it's about this man becomes God. You are the higher self. You are the Superman.
And that's the occult. You take world religions and you twist and warp their. You take the even the good parts of all those religions, because they all do have some morality in them somewhere. And
it's really the opposite of anthropology. Like, with anthropology, you look at a myth, whether it's indigenous people of Canada, like the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Inuit, or you look at people in India or China, you look at it and you say, what did it mean to these people in this historical context, in this culture? What's the authentic, real meaning in these people and their lives, right? And very often, like as with the misinterpretation of the Tao Te Ching, its historical significance and the meaning of that text in Chinese culture is totally different from what Europeans did with it. Why Europeans totally reinvented this text. Yeah. That's why I'm mentioning it. Aleister Crowley himself is an example. Oh, and Aleister Crowley, his knowledge of classical Chinese. I mean, he couldn't read Chinese any more than he could read ancient Egyptian. I mean, he couldn't read Egyptian. He couldn't read. There's no accident. But yeah, I just say, but what Peterson is doing, it is the same as Crowley, and it's the same as Carl Jung, which is that he's just willing to, in this hallucinatory state, just quote, oh yeah, the Eye of Horus, and anything from any culture, and Marduk, and Timur, and it all means whatever he wants it to mean, and he will say, yeah, Peterson does this constantly. This is what Jordan Peterson is doing. He'll just pick and choose, and he will insist to you that, I think it is ultimately through his own drug-induced experience, he'll insist to you that what he is saying in the 21st century about Marduk, about Horus, or about Jesus Christ, or about the Buddha, that it's the truth that has been true since before human beings had writing. It's not just something he made up with the Wow. So anyway, look, I don't know. Do you want to comment on that? But that's in terms of the methodology of Jordan Peterson. That's what I see, and I see him treating Adolf Hitler the same way he's willing to loosely reinterpret and appropriate ancient gods, texts written in languages he can't understand, so on and so forth.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Hitler in association with those ancient gods, because I take your point that Peterson is doing what was so popular in the 70s and so on. It's just a recycling of that. There's always the kind of market for people who, and I agree with you that people can take whatever interpretation they want away from it, because it doesn't really mean much of it. Be like Horus, pay attention like Horus. What does that mean? But the thing is that Peterson actually has very specific meanings that I unpack in the book, and those gods actually stand for real people, historical figures. They're stand-ins they symbolize actual people. For example, Marduk. Marduk is a stand-in for Hitler. As strange as that sounds.
Wow. Okay, so I have not finished the book. Just full disclosure to the audience. No, but great. Okay, I'll be interested to see that when you get to it. Okay.
And it's easy to figure it out because when he talks about Marduk, he lists he uses a number of adjectives and speaks in a certain way. He's the god of speech. He could see everything going on and whatever. And then when he talks about Hitler, he always talks about how he was such a great speaker and he had such good vision and all that stuff. And he uses you can just make a list of here's how he describes Marduk, here how he describes Hitler. Obviously, Marduk is a stand-in. Marduk's at the top of the dominance hierarchy. He has said Hitler is at the top of the dominance hierarchy.
Right. So I just put this as a question.
Yeah.
It is very clear that Jordan Peterson has no sincere interest in the real history of communism. It's very clear that he has no sincere interest in the history of fascism. Sorry, I'll just finish because I'm just doing these things, bro. It's clear that he has no sincere interest in the history of communism, no sincere interest in the history of fascism. He obviously has no sincere interest in the history of ancient Near Eastern religions. It's not, or neither Egypt nor ancient Samarkand or anywhere else. I mean, he's no sincere research in it. But I'll put it this way. What is his sincere interest? I mean, you can take that in any direction you want, but given that he's put in this work to gather together this strange bird's nest of seemingly random, mythological references and frankly gross distortions of 20th century history, what do you think his interest is?
Nazism, fascism.
So all right. So you really think So you really think he is actually a classical anti-Semitic neo-Nazi in that sense? Okay.
And he's an occultist. So that it's all just.
But to me, one doesn't prove the other. I mean, that to me. Sorry, I'm not. Again, I haven't finished reading your book. I'll be interested to see if you prove the case. But to me, it seems the more we admit that he's insane, the more we admit that he's a drug addict and doesn't know what he's doing, then the harder it is to prove that he has an objective like that, like he's actually trying to revive something like Nazism.
He has multiple objectives. So in the book I listed, he wants, basically he's on a mission to harm. So and he can do that in very subtle ways by just filling up people's minds with nonsense, like wasting students' time. I mean, imagine, think about it. Imagine a female student from Saudi Arabia comes to Canada to study psychology. Maybe she can go back to Saudi Arabia, get a master's, go back to Saudi Arabia and work for the government and as a social worker and maybe a psychologist, like in a country that would probably really need it, And this could be good for her family and good for society. And what is she learning about Marduk and the Eye of Horus? So that's a kind of harm, like harming young people's education. So that's one goal, and it goes all the way up to Nazism and even beyond. Lying to people, manipulating people. He's absolutely diabolical. He is insidious. And all of his goals, he has many of them, and they're all malevolent, as is he. But he is first and foremost, to his core, a Nazi, an actual Nazi. And people don't think that such people exist. If you add, what's the takeaway message from the Third Reich and World War II? It seems to be that there are no Nazis. What are you talking about?
So I just mentioned, I am not naive in this way. I'm a former political science major. I have spoken to, and on YouTube, I've crossed swords with people who are Nazis and neo-Nazis today. And all my life, I've had to deal with communists. It's much easier to find an overt communist than an overt Nazi at present. I think communism is going through a revival of public popularity in 2021. So I am not naive in that way. However, I can challenge you as follows. Has Jordan Peterson ever been a member of a neo-Nazi organization?
I don't know, but his movement is a neo-Nazi organization. It's a neo-Nazi organization. It's just clandestine. So the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, as dubbed by the media, is a clandestine neo-Nazi organization. Many of his followers are too dim to realize it, and so are the journalists and all the other power holders.
I'll give you a contrast.
All of the things that he said. How many nice things can you say about Adolf Hitler?
Right. Before
people start to maybe think, something? Maybe he likes Adolf Hitler. I mean, this is 40 pages of him going on about how wonderful Hitler was. You ever get the idea that maybe he thinks...
I get it. But the counter argument is that he's just insane. So there's an interesting contrast, the possibility of which is presented by your book and by your YouTube videos, to Faith Goldy. So many people don't know the name Faith Goldy. She's not that famous. If you search my YouTube channel, there is a video I made that is called Faith Goldy, Canadian Hitler. So, just to say a little bit to the audience before we get into Faith Goldie. So Faith Goldie is a kind of white supremacist neo-Nazi leader.
She's a neo-Nazi, yes.
However, Faith Goldie conceals precisely what Jordan Peterson reveals, and I would say, vice versa. Faith Goldie would never come out and say the positive things about Hitler that Jordan Peterson says. Her whole act is to try to present herself as an acceptable mainstream politician. Like when she's running for mayor. So again, it's not that I disagree. I do think Faith Goldie is somewhere on the spectrum of white supremacist or neo-Nazi. What you could get into the precise differences between her and a neo-Nazi in the strictest definition of the term or something. But Faith Goldie does not say any of the things Jordan Peterson says. And to my mind, again, what Jordan Peterson is saying and doing is very different from example of Faith Goldie. So reply to that any way you want to, but including you are interested in the connection between those two precise people. They are connected historical figures. Go on.
Yes, no, and you know that, Isaac, because you know about Faith Goldie because you're Canadian, and that's another aspect of this story is that Peterson often mentions Canadian neo-Nazis, but non-Canadians wouldn't know who they are. So
Ernst Zundel. These are really obscure names. Ernst Zundel and Faith Goldie.
Because no one knows. It's like in Canada, Canada's like an inside club, right? It's a bit like
Canadian mass murderers too. He mentions Canadians who've committed atrocities and mass murders and things. Yeah, there's weird Canadian cultural references. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But he does have things. So, for example, Faith Goldie was outed as a neo-Nazi after she spoke to other neo-Nazis, American neo-Nazis who worked for the Daily Stormer and the 2017 Unite the Right rally. And what she did, and this is what the media missed.
Let me just say to the audience, it was never hard to figure out what Faith Goldie said. It didn't take that much research or imagination. But anyway, go on, yes.
No, what she did was, the conversation she had was leaked to the press, and then that was it. She was outed as a neo-Nazi. She was kicked off of Facebook in Canada. Canadian non-conservative politicians in Canada applauded her being kicked off, and she's pretty much been banished. And then Peterson had to, she was supposed to appear with Peterson, but then she didn't, and well, it was a very tough decision, and it's not that she's a bad person. She's just too hot a commodity right now. That's what Peterson said. Too hot a commodity. She just parlayed with other neo-Nazis in a Mein Kampf code at the Unite the Right rally. You didn't mention any of that at all because you're just like she is.
Just to mention that she physically went to and participated in the Unite the Right rally. Yeah.
But what people didn't get was that what people listened to the recording and realized, oh my God, that's horrible. But what no one realized, what she was doing was when she was talking to the neo-Nazis from the States, they were paraphrasing and quoting Mein Kampf to each other.
Yes.
That's the code. That's crypto-fascism. Talk about a yearning and so on, for a future civilization, for a place where the grandchildren can grow up and so on, and everyone needs to wake up. And America's become like the new Berlin or the new Vienna or something, which is, and she says something like there's so many degenerate and low class and vermin like people here or something to that effect. It's straight out of Mein Kampf.
Right.
And so the media got the gist of it, the tone, but they failed to realize that this is actually oral play. So this is
I mentioned to you. Sorry, this may or may not be interesting to the audience, but as an example of that, again, directly involving Faith Goldie, there is a video Faith Goldie made with Lauren Southern. And it's just the two of them sitting and talking on the floor, Faith Goldie with Lauren Southern. So now today, I doubt you can find it on YouTube. I doubt you can find it, but it was on Lauren Southern's own YouTube channel. Like I would assume it's taken down. But in that, there's a passage where Lauren Southern asked some incredibly vague question, like, "What are you planning to do next, like with your careers, and what are you planning to do on YouTube, or whatever?" And Faith Goldie gives this very carefully worded, very slow and meticulous statement about finding the secret connections between things. And if you know something about what's going on in the alt-right, it is a perfect textbook example of dog whistling or speaking in code. Yeah. And what's also interesting is they're both on camera when it's filmed. And the other woman, the blonde woman, forgetting now, she breaks up laughing. She responds in this very peculiar way when there's nothing funny about what Faith Goldie is saying. Lauren Southern is cracking up, and she has this very strange sort of expression in her face, and you can tell she knows what's going on, and she's maybe astonished that Faith is being this provocative or this forward. So yeah, there is a kind of game that goes on the internet that way, and there are cases where you can catch it red-handed. The problem with Peterson is he's such a lunatic. The counter argument is lunacy. The counter argument is to say, well, yeah,
but there's a method to his madness, to use a cliche. So he is mad, but he's also speaking in a crypto-fascistic code. And I've deciphered that code. It's actually child's play to understand it. It would have to be simple to understand.
Because he's reaching out to simple-minded people. It's obvious.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. That's right. Thank you for finishing my thought.
Just how sophisticated an analysis of Marduk can you offer without losing the...
Don't understand. He went higher and higher in the dominance hierarchy. He was such a great speaker. He organized his people in the state. He rejuvenated the state.
So look, I would like to interview you again when I've finished the book, and maybe that'll coincide with when you publish your volume 2, because he's going to do a second book. But let me ask you this to wrap up this interview, because an hour is a nice round. What is your interpretation of the crustacean mythology, the lobster and crayfish? So that chapter or that aspect of what Jordan Peterson did, what is Troy Parfitt's view of it?
The whole lobster thing is quackery. It's like we are biological, our biological imperative. We're just run by serotonin. He's comparing basically sea insects to human beings. So he's positioning his listeners as basically bugs. And they take up that role. Yeah, I'm a bug,
You want to be the biggest bug on the bottom of the sea.
And it's all about biology, like the biological imperative role run by chemicals and so on. This was who else talked about the biological imperative and so on, and it's a blend of Nazi eugenics speak and warped Darwinism, and it's also combined with occultism, as I said earlier, because I think that the idea of the lobster in part comes from Aleister Crowley's use of the lobster. The lobster appears in the occult. So with Peterson, if it has to do with Nazism, he loves it. If it has to do with occultism and Nazism, he loves it even more. That's the connection. So almost everyone Peterson mentions in his books, look them up. He's not talking about them for reasons.
I agree with that, but I want to stay on topic here. What do you think in Jordan Peterson's mind is the point of that chapter? Like what? So in the same way, I could ask, look, if I were talking to Jordan Peterson, I could say, what do you expect people to do with this advice to be like the Eye of Horus? What do you expect people to do with this elaborate mythology about lobsters and crayfish? So what do you think? What do you think he expects? What is the point from Jordan Peterson? I can sit here and agree with you. It's pointless, but he's running with some intention.
Crayfish. He's talking about people. Yeah. It's all a metaphor for people. He's not really. He doesn't know anything about science.
But what? I completely agree. He knows nothing about science. But what is the point for those people then? What is the point of the myth? What is the? It's a metaphor, but a metaphor for what? For what purpose?
You're supposed to understand that they've got a lot of those. This is going to sound really, really strange. This is a very strange story, but a lot of the text about lobsters mentions opponents, lobsters battling opponents. He plagiarizes that from Hitler. But of course, no one would ever understand this, and this is where it all kind of breaks down. It gets really, really strange. He's trying to communicate this really, really warped ideology, through this kind of schizoid, loose association language that has to do with Nazism and the occult. Yet his followers can barely spell. I mean, they can't even figure out basic information, let alone a code. So this is where it all breaks down. He keeps telling them that they're like lobsters. Don't you get it? You have a biological imperative. Ascend the dominance hierarchy. Who's at the top of the dominance hierarchy? I told you in another lecture, Hitler. In other words, be like Hitler, but they don't get it because they're thick. So, the whole thing doesn't really make sense. We have a lunatic who's speaking to an audience in a fascistic, crypto-fascist code, and the audience is dim, and they don't understand. And not only that, but intelligent people don't understand. Other like as I've said, he talks about mythology a lot, biology, but they don't ask themselves critical questions. Who are the lobsters? Who do the lobsters represent? Why does he keep talking about the lobsters? Who's Marduk? Why should we be like Horus? What does this God represents somebody, what's Peterson's aim? Like, even when he's going and banging on about like order and chaos, you don't wake up every morning and fist pump about, you need to have order. We need, that's order, order, we need to eliminate chaos. What do you mean by order? What do you mean by chaos? Are you talking about people? And he is. There's an orderly group of people. There's a chaotic group of people. We need to eradicate chaos. We need to eradicate this disorderly group of people who, in this case, is non-whites. There's such a lack of basic critical thinking in this story. It beggars belief. I don't understand how. What I have discovered is not unbelievable. What's unbelievable is no one else has put together the story. But in any event, I do appreciate your questions.
Well, good. Look, I will leave it up to the audience. I'm going to provide a link both to his YouTube channel and to the book in the description. So obviously you can get the book and read it now. I felt like this book was written 5 minutes ago. I thought you'd written this book after Jordan Peterson's newest book came out, because I do think it is very much relevant to what's going on there. And, obviously his YouTube channel is something he updates periodically. It looks like he was putting up one video once every couple of months. So unlike the book, that doesn't just sit there in a static form. My concern is that what you're doing is interpreting madness. And no matter how finely or precisely, if it's just bullshit, you know what I mean? You can't really come to any meaningful conclusion with the interpretation of complete bullshit.
Because I've had to try to get into the mind of a madman.
Yeah.
It's a scary place, and I've gone quite far into looking into the dark corners of that person's mind. Yeah. It's a frightening place.
Well, look, I'll ask you this because go on.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say.
People think, people can't differentiate between someone who's describing a madman. They think that, they think that I'm the madman,
Right, sure.
I'm trying to explain to you what he's doing. Would you please listen to what I'm saying? But they just think that, that what you're saying sounds crazy. To which I think, yes, it does sound crazy because he's out of his mind.
Well, so Troy, the audience doesn't know this about you. Troy also has a background in Chinese studies or sinology, in the history, language, and politics of China.
You look that up.
Yes, and so do I. We have this in common. We have a number of odd things in common. Which one of us speaks better Chinese remains to be seen. We can have a duel. We can start both doing Chinese language education videos on YouTube and see who makes less money.
That guy should be.
I know, but I know. But about 10 years ago, that seemed to be the main thing going on in your life. But another example of someone who's considered a madman is Mao Zedong. Now, I am anti-communist. You can even see from the flag I have in the background. I am morally opposed to Maoism and Chinese communism, and I don't need to go into that.
Against mass murder?
I have something, but no, everything. I'm against the economics. I'm against the philosophy of social. Even when you take the mass murder out of it, I'm a very harsh critic of Maoism and Maoist communism. However, what I found about Mao was the more you knew about his particular cultural background, the books he read and the books that were popular and the debates that were going on between the age of 15 and 25 for him, the less he seemed insane and the more he seemed like a really mediocre person whose ideas were derivative of this other stuff, which maybe itself is insane. You know what I mean? Now, I just say likewise. I think your volume 1 is susceptible to this, and maybe volume 2 you'll go into it or something. But okay, there is this sense that Jordan Peterson is crazy, but there's also a sense in which he's just a kind of mediocre asshole who is reflecting, what was in the 1980s. And in some ways, it's really a kind of echo of the 1960s, like the real heyday of LSD-infused reinterpretation of Eastern mythology was maybe the 1960s. But there's this sort of, second wave of it in the 1980s, that he's this mediocre mind who read these particular books and frankly did these particular drugs. And he's just giving you this kind of rehash of sources that are, insane to begin with.
He loves communism, by the way. He pretends not to like it, and when he talks about communists, he does so as a rhetorical stratagem to link people like me, liberals, to communists. The liberals are the communists. But he secretly loves communism and like 20th century Marxism, Leninism, because it was evil, and all evil is good.
Yeah.
Evil be thou my good. It says in Milton's Paradise Lost. Peterson quotes that. Takes that line and quotes it, "Evil be thou my good," and Aleister Crowley quoted the same line. Funny thing, eh? And so he lives in a cocoon of pictures. I mean, next to his desk, there's a Soviet propaganda portrait of 5 people about to be executed. Who would put that in their house?
Yeah.
What a lunatic.
I mean, I think the counter argument is just to point out that in all of Peterson's writing, correct me if I'm wrong, and in all of Peterson's lectures, I think he never gives a view of a better society he's trying to accomplish or a better political order. Whenever he's questioned about that, he will immediately retreat to saying the point of his philosophy is to clean up your room. It's for you individually to be more morally upright. Yeah.
He's not political. He's psychological. Yeah, of course. And this is again just part of it's just another lie, you know. And you mentioned Mao Zedong.
Well, it's a very different strategy from Lauren Southern or the other kind of crypto fascists of our time. I mean, I just say it's certainly strategically it's very different. Yeah.
He's more clever than they are. I mean, Lauren Southern is not an intelligent person, and neither is Faith Gold. Lauren Southern was incidentally banned. Peterson's pal, Lauren Southern, was incidentally forbidden from entering the United Kingdom under a terrorist act. Which gives you maybe a better sense of some of the people that he consorts with. Do you know that he also, Peterson is, are you familiar, as a Canadian, are you familiar with Ernst Zundel?
Of course, yes. And no one in the audience will be, but he's basically Canada's most notorious Nazi sympathizer and Holocaust denier and what have you, yeah.
And Peterson defended him in Norway and said that the Canadian government was wrong to prosecute him, and that the audience ought to be careful because one day the government might prosecute them. Zundel was given 2 years in Canada for being a threat to national security, and then he was deported to his native Germany, where he was given 5 years for inciting racial hatred against the Jews. Peterson's defending this guy. Right. He was and he also, like Peterson, identified as a champion of free speech, and like Peterson, he was out of his mind. But he can talk about Ernst Zundel in public, and people don't know who that is.
Well, let me say this, though. There was a long period when Jordan Peterson's drug addiction was secret. And I made videos talking about it. And I'll say this, look, I'm an older gentleman. I have a lot of real-world experience. If you know someone who goes through the type of dramatic weight loss Jordan Peterson goes through while having the dramatic change in his personality that Jordan Peterson went through, there are very few explanations other than drug addiction. Looking at him before the drug addiction element went public, it was like, well, either this is drug addiction or this is insanity of an extreme and very unstable kind. It's very rare to have the combination of physical and emotional and intellectual symptoms he had without drug addiction. But this is what I want to put to you is, before the drug addiction went public, people were talking about the possibility that he would be elected the next Prime Minister of Canada. And I think that was a very real possibility. Now, currently, his star is at a much lower ebb, I think, because of the drug addiction. But I can put that to you that unlike Faith Goldie, so of course he could be elected mayor of Toronto easily. He could be elected premier of Ontario. And again, if the drugs hadn't interrupted his meteoric rise, no, I mean it seems to me that real political power is very much within his grasp.
One day we are going to put someone in charge who is as absolutely insane as Jordan Peterson. We're going to cause so much trouble that we're not going to. I mean, it almost happened in the U.S.
Yeah.
And we were lucky to survive Trump, and he might not even be gone. But he is so nuts. And no, he was planning on running for prime minister, or at least for some seat or something for the Conservative Party, as mentioned by Bernard Schiff, his former friend and associate, who wrote a column in the Toronto Star saying Jordan Peterson used to endorse him or something, but now I believe he's dangerous. And then Peterson denied, saying that, I have no interest in politics. But then, of course, this is just another one of his lies. And then his friend said that he talked about running for the Conservative Party.
Well, I say too, this is not a defense of Jordan Peterson. I have known men of his generation who lie the same way all the time. It's totally morally reprehensible, but that style where it's a little bit of dishonesty all the time, and you can tell that underneath it, it's not just that he speaks that way, it's that he really thinks that way. I'll give a shout out to another book. You may or may not know this. This is Blitzed by Norman Ohler. Okay, so I think the quality of writing is very poor. I think if you can read German, get the German, because the quality of English is really poor. But this is an important book. I was going to say, I have made my own YouTube video talking about the role of the occult in Nazism. So sensu stricto Nazism in Germany at that time. I don't mean neo-Nazism today, although they're certainly linked and they're both discussed in the video. But, anyone who starts to look into the occult elements of Nazism in Germany will immediately say, oh, but this is so irrational, this is so preposterous, this is so crazy. Even, just to give a brief example, but the stuff they say about India, the stuff they say about Egypt, anyone with a high school education, what do you mean? At that time, the British Empire exists in India. People know the reality of it. This isn't true at all, what you're saying about India. So I just say various aspects of the mythology are self-evidently preposterous and crazy in this historical period. But a crucial part of the story that this book draws attention to is drug addiction. That people already were drug addicts in, Nazi-era Germany, World War II Germany. That actually what we often talk about as mass hysteria or mass hypnosis, mass drug addiction, mass drug dependency was a huge part of that.
Yes, I mentioned that book in volume 2, and I've spoken to the author about,
oh, really?
About my book, drugs are, yes, again, isn't it funny? Peterson's hero, Adolf Hitler, was a drug addict. His doctor, Theodor Morell, kept him happy with uppers and downers and speedballs and whatever else for years. And,
but on a mass scale, the Nazis and Nazi soldiers were being given methamphetamine. Go on,
Yes, that's right, and exactly, and not just Hitler. And if you look in Hitler's Table Talk, which is the book that Peterson often recommends, and says that he has read repeatedly and calls it amazing. I think one of the reasons why it's so amazing is because it's filled with discombobulated speech, and what you're looking at is maybe schizophrenia meets or borderline schizophrenia meets speedballs. And I think that's why Hitler's
long-term drug use and sleep deprivation catching up with him, and he was pretty crazy to begin with, but as time went on, that worked.
Telling boring stories about people he used to know, while all around him there are death camps. Europe is dotted with death camps. It's so incredible that people would be serving him and listening to him, and yes, mein Führer, so interesting, and that's why Peterson loves it. It's so it's amazing what Hitler did. It's a huge trick foisted on everyone, and Peterson is foisting his own trick, his own joke, his own hoax on everyone. They think that he's a self-help coach. They don't understand that he's a neo-Nazi.
Well, I would go so far as to say that he has a kind of fantasy that he can be the Aleister Crowley of this generation, and in a limited sense that he can be the Adolf Hitler of this generation.
I would agree with
you might say that his fantasy is that he could be what Aleister Crowley thought Adolf Hitler was for this generation. It's a very specific kind of view or delusion of Hitler. But let me conclude the interview by asking you, if you look ahead to the next 5 years, where do you think this will go next? And I admit, with Jordan Peterson, I think most of us were surprised he even had one more book in him. Maybe it's got nowhere left to go. But what would your prediction be for his project? What he'll try to accomplish, or what he's going to do in the next 5 years?
Well, futurology is a fool's game, I would say. But I would think that millions of people will suddenly read my book and realize that he's a Nazi and he'll go to prison for violating Canadian hate speech laws. I'm sure the process will start next week. I don't know. His Beyond Order is a lot of it is recycling. Like he says he uses the same phrases. So like as I said, when he's plagiarizing Hitler here, but he did that. He used the same bit of plagiarism in 12 Rules for Life. It's like he's on a repeat. He's spinning his wheels or something. I don't know how many more books can he write about the occult and Nazism that are covertly, and dress them up as self-help books. I'm not sure. I don't know. I have no idea what will happen. So I don't know. I actually thought that he mightn't recover from his drug-induced coma and all that stuff, but he seems to be quite recovered. So I have no idea what's going to happen.
I just say this: we did have a personality on YouTube for many years named Stefan Molyneux. Oh, yes. Now, how quickly these people are forgotten. He has now been deleted from YouTube. He was an example of someone who very intentionally advanced a white supremacist and specifically anti-black doctrine. Now, I'm mentioning that because some neo-Nazis are obsessed with Jews and some are obsessed with this. But this was specifically about white versus black in the American and Canadian context. And he advanced that for years covertly. It was like minimum a 5-year process of claiming to be a libertarian and claiming to want equal rights for everybody, and then kind of taking half a step and half a step and half a step and letting the audience in on what his real purpose is. And yeah, I have actually made some YouTube videos talking about that. Go on, yeah.
Being a men's health coach or something, I'm helping men, and then he would try to get men off of women, like get away from those women, they're bad. And Peterson does something similar, and because of course if you're a heterosexual man and you have a girlfriend and get married, you're going to be domesticated, you're going to throw away those Aleister Crowley books, aren't you? And you're going to finally...
But I just say, with Molyneux, so Molyneux is evil and bad and wrong, but he's not crazy in the way that Jordan Peterson was. He had the self-discipline and sense of purpose and so on. He really intentionally pursued that goal. And now someone who was paying attention could have said at one point, if you ask, where is this going in the next 5 years? It's like, oh, well, eventually he's going to kind of show his hand. He's going to reveal that this is really what it's about, is this kind of white versus black. And for him, it's specifically about differences in levels of IQ and the different...
Which is an alt-right signal, an alt-right, and he's always talking about the Ashkenazi Jews and so on.
Right.
And which are the Jews that settled in the Middle Ages, settled in, I think, northern France and western or eastern Germany. So why is he talking about this? It's all a game. Why is he talking about race and IQ?
Right. But my point is, with Molyneux, that's intentional. That's cerebral. Yes. That's Molyneux. Yes. With Jordan Peterson, I feel like I'm just looking at an elderly drug addict, coming apart in front of my eyes.
I would disagree with you there.
Good.
As I said, he is insane, but I think that he has moments of clarity. I think he suffers from psychosis. Yeah. And I think that it's at times it's kind of. I've looked at him and thought, is he having a psychotic episode now, or is he on something, or what? But he's also disciplined in a kind of frightening way. Right. I would say sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's impulsive. And that's actually one of the things you said that you weren't impressed by my narcissist.
Yeah, I would say it's one of the weaker elements. Go on, yeah.
And you may have a point in that. I think that narcissists are often very impulsive, and Peterson doesn't seem to be impulsive. He can be quite in control. But I would say that he's also completely dedicated to a project that almost no one understands. And sometimes and that's the strange thing. And I wish that people would try to understand what he's doing. It's actually quite easy to figure out once you start to unravel it. It's that's what he's doing. This is what he means when he talks about order and chaos. This is what he's doing. It's all very understandable.
Okay, but the secrets of Marduk. So look, as I said, I'd be delighted to have another interview with you when I've read more of the book, maybe when your volume 2 is coming out. There are links in the description, both to Troy's YouTube channel and to his book on Amazon, it's very affordably priced. You can get it and read it on Kindle for a song. And, I would say also to people in the audience, if you disagree with Troy's interpretation, come up with a better one, because I think, the raw materials of your analysis are undeniable. It is undeniable that, let's just again, I really think the drugs matter here. All right. Yeah. Jordan Peterson is someone who recommends cocaine. Positively. Yes. Speaks positively. How is it possible? Well, okay, perfect parallel. He is someone who, right up until the moment it destroyed his life and he almost died in hospital, recommended antidepressants passionately. Passionate defender of antidepressants. Passionate defender of all the drugs he took himself. Biopsychiatry drugs. And still to this day, he has this completely incoherent attitude towards this. He's someone you could look at him and say, well, drugs have destroyed your life. And yet he speaks about them positively this way.
It's amazing. At the University of Toronto,
right.
promoted cocaine to his students and said, it's amazing, that you don't do it is not strange or something, or strange that you don't do it all the time. You should be nose deep in that stuff nonstop. He told the students. Right. And although you you could explain this away. You shouldn't. He's suggesting to his students to take cocaine at Canada's foremost institute of
Right. Well, my point is, my point is not to insinuate that he's actually a drug dealer or something. My point is that he is foolish enough, that despite having a PhD in exactly that field, if anyone should know the dangers of antidepressants, it should be Jordan Peterson. If anyone should know the dangers of benzodiazepines, so this is another class of drugs, but they're prescribed in the same way as antidepressants. Oh, there's something wrong with you. Oh, to give an example of benzodiazepine use, you experience fear while on airplanes, fear and anxiety. Oh, benzodiazepines. Yeah. So it's handed out in this way. Benzodiazepines are currently the most prescribed drug in the United States of America, especially elderly people are given them in huge numbers, and they have terrible consequences. But the point is not that I should know better. The point is not that you should know better, Troy. This is precisely his field. If anyone should know the dangers of cocaine addiction, the dangers of benzodiazepines, the dangers of antidepressants, it should be him. And he knows none of it, So that's,
He wants those people to take drugs, and he wants them to ruin their lives. This is what I said. He has multiple aims. If he can keep promoting drug use and so on, it'll make it easier for him to brainwash them, and the chance of them doing something terrible, ruining their lives is higher, and then he wins anything. He's on a mission. This is the narcissist. The narcissist is on a mission, of revenge for the trauma that they suffered, for the hurt and pain that they've experienced, whatever that may be in his life. He is insidious. He is evil itself.
So to quote your own book, Troy's assertion here is that this is evil for the sake of evil. A concept that Jordan Peterson has been fascinated with his whole life, and that he quotes again and again from everyone, whether it is Aleister Crowley or Hitler. Yeah. So that's the bottom line for you, is that it's not that he's doing something that's incidentally harmful on his way to what he thinks of as a positive goal. The harm is the purpose of Jordan Peterson's book. Okay, guys, so I gave you guys the links in the description. I think you have a sense of just how stimulating a cross-examination of the philosophy of Jordan Peterson this is. Thank you very much for your time, Troy, and I hope to speak to you again.
Thanks, Azel. Thank you.